Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what? Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool.
In an age of learning designers and learning experience designers, there's not much love for the term instructional design, yet one man continues to use it. Not only to use it, but to glory in it. Like the last Japanese soldier from World War II, still hiding out on a remote island, Leonard Houx refuses to believe the war is over. He continues to stand up for the heritage and utility of instructional design. And if you're coming to get his surrender, you'd better be tooled up. He's read everything. And he's not just a theoretician, but a practitioner. As well as being the director of the eLearning network, Leonard is head of instructional design at the Cass Business School, where he tells me he's the only instructional designer, so he gets to design everything. He looks a bit like Matt Damon and has a shy, amiable manner, but make no mistake about it. When he gets into his subject, it's pure Jason Bourne. Break the neck. Walk away. He's taking no prisoners in this interview, so prepare to have some of your most cherished beliefs challenged. We started out by talking about skateboarding.
There's a term in skateboarding, there's actually two acronyms that people use. They use ABD and NBD. And NBD it's about tricks.
Right.
And NBD is never been done, which is like the best. And things can be NBD different ways. There could be maybe an established trick, but in a new place or in a new way. But ABD is the other thing, which has already been done. And I think a funny illustration of this in skateboarding is I was watching this Netflix biography of this pro skateboarder named Chris Cole, who grew up in the suburbs of Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia. And he talked about this phase when he was young where he called it inventing skateboarding, where he was doing all of these tricks. And he thought that he thought they were NBD, he thought that these had never been done. He was inventing all these skateboarding tricks, and he was coming up with new names for them. He had like a new name for all these tricks, and and it just happened. He just hadn't really watched enough skate videos because they were all completely kind of normal, established tricks. And I think that in a way, there's a bit of a risk of the industry kind of doing that, where they're inventing instructional design all over again, because they're not reading some of this older material and learning from our elders. And there's also, I guess, not just that, but a potential loss of a lot of ideas, and I should say maybe a third possibility of actually old ideas appearing. Sorry, I should say four possibilities.
Right. It's like a Monty Python sketch.
Of like the good old ideas appearing, but in a kind of shallower form.
Yep. And
then the fourth possibility is the bad ideas appearing, as you well know, as these kind of zombies that they just bad ideas that just won't die.
Yeah.
Who are the people that we should be reading? I'd say Dave M. Merrill is a really important person. Gagne for me, is still really important. Siegfried Engelmann described what he did as instructional design, even though he's not counted among instructional designers. Reigeluth. However, and I guess in more kind of current times, Paul Sweller, Kirshner, Marienbohr, these are people who describe their work as instructional design and tie their work to the discourse, to the history of instructional design. And I think that there's different kinds of risks, different kinds of threats. In higher education, there's a different kind of threat that you don't see in L&D, and I work in higher education. And in higher ed, it's not entirely innocent. It's not entirely from ignorance that instructional design has been ignored. It's really been quite actually deliberate. And if you read, for example, the first edition early work of Diana Laurillard and her inaugural work, Rethinking, I think it's Rethinking Higher Education, she kind of does this kind of typical academic rhetorical move where she sets up three options. This is like a really kind of standard thing in programmatic works. And, and I think I forget what the first option is. It's like something terrible, Gagne, or herself. And and she presents Gagne in the worst possible light. And she presents really Gagne as instructional design, which is sort of fair, sort of not. And then just dismisses him out of hand as she says that it's not evidence-based, it's medieval. She describes it, and I think in her second edition she cleans up this language a little bit, but she describes it as, basically based on nothing. And she also dismisses cognitive load theory in her book. And, I don't know, I've only been in this country for 10 years, but there's still things that elude me. Was Diana Laurillard the cause? She's probably in higher ed. She's considered by many to be the most important figure in online learning. But is she really representative of a certain culture and zeitgeist, or is she the one who sort of heralded this? I don't know. She, at least in her work, in that work, addresses it head on. She addresses Gagne, whereas what you see from the people after her is just a systematic blackballing or blacklisting of anything with the name of instructional design or cognitive load theory.
Yeah.
And such that in the last 10 years, you saw this revival of a movement called learning design. And actually, I should go back a little bit about Diana Laurillard. The funny thing is about Gagne is that in a way, her main objection is he's just making it up. This like the events of instruction. He's just made up a model. He just invented it. It's not derived from anything.
Not based on any data or anything.
Yeah. He's taken, which I think is not entirely fair, because he's taken the events are, and then all he's done is just suggest in a very humble way, here's what a design could look like. Here's what a sequence could look like. We have these kind of high level pedagogical concepts. Here's what a sequence could look like.
Yeah.
And it obviously really caught on. But Laurillard just dismisses it, says the sequence, he just made it up. But I think that the kind of the punchline is that's what design is. Yeah. Design is making things up based on the best information that you have. Something I'd maybe like to talk about is the difficulty with how this idea of learning experience taps into a kind of fundamental misconception we have about education, which is that it's something intuitive and it's something transparent to us. And I think trainers can often be in an unusual position, actually, because there's more pressure to actually get results. Whereas for lecturers, the things that are actually measured are really much further from anything to do with changed behavior. But just to let me finish about the learning design, what's happened in recent years is there's been a movement, and it's called learning design. And it's been tied to a few well-funded JISC projects. It's been tied to probably the most successful version of it is called the ABC Learning Design Program, which is done out of UCL, and it's very popular. And it's a facilitative approach where basically instead of, an instructional design fashion, you kind of come up with like a systematic design. It's just, you just kind of meet with people and shuffle cards around and ask people, what would you like to do? But there was also a group called the met in Lanarka, which I think is an island in Greece, and wrote a kind of declaration. They call it the Lanarka Declaration, which was their statement about what learning design is. And what they tried to say is that learning design isn't really about the design of learning, but the creating of a system or a kind of a language or grammar through which people can express learning designs. Mm-hmm. Now, that's all fine, but I think that the irony of it is that when you read the Lanarka Declaration, it's clear that the people who wrote it did not know what instructional design was.
Okay.
They literally could not even offer a definition of it. And I think that's really poor. It's very embarrassing, and people should. Martin Weller at Open University called it, that we have this kind of year zero approach to online learning. It's or better yet, a friend of my wife, Colin Patterson, he's an entertainment correspondent for the BBC, said that every generation thinks that they're inventing rock and roll.
Mm-hmm. Every generation does, yeah.
Yeah. And in a way, you almost don't want to take that from them, but it feels like every generation thinks that they're inventing instructional design. And,
but it's different, isn't it? I mean, I was in the 77. I was in a punk rock band, and we were reinventing rock and roll, and we didn't know what we were doing, and it was an incredibly joyful thing that we didn't know what we were doing. It didn't matter that we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
You can't do that with organisational learning, surely.
That's true, and actually, maybe it's a bad analogy, because if you didn't feel that way, you wouldn't have done it.
Coming back to what you said about zombie ideas, there's no doubt we do have a few zombie ideas stalking in the landscape. I do want to get your chainsaw out and lay into a few, which are the most pernicious. But perhaps more importantly, how do you think we should deal with the fact that as an industry, it's the new entrants to the space that seem to get infected most easily? By that I mean, what I mean by saying that is that you'll often find in many spaces that older people hang on to bad ideas. It feels like economics perhaps.
Yeah.
So that, but in our space, it's not like that. It's the new entrants that suddenly come along and say, "I've got this great new thing called learning styles, and we're all going to learn our learning style."
Yeah. It's a bit like they say that, like when you go to, your first day in university, or like if you join the armed forces, whoever the, the first people that talk to you are the people like you are going to spend the rest of your time like never wanting to speak to again.
Freshers week.
Yeah, and Freshers week, and it's true, and I mean, to me, the kind of the top ones would be actually, and maybe it's just because it's on my mind and I'm fixating on it, but the emphasis on learning experience isn't a learning myth in itself, but there's a seed of a learning myth inside it, which is that learning is intuitive. Learning is a transparent process that we all understand because, we all went to school, we've all learned things before, and that learning is something that we experience. Learning is not something that we experience. Learning is something that we infer from doing certain things, and learning itself is what's in our long-term memory. There's a guy named David Didow who wrote a book that had a great title, which was, I think, "What if everything we knew about learning was wrong?" I think that when we work as instructional designers, when we work in L&D and in e-learning, we have to let learning be a bit more strange, and we need to be much more open and inquisitive about it. And I think we need to emphasize that to other people, because I think that this is one of the reasons why instructional design and people with other similar titles aren't valued, because people think that that whatever you're doing is obvious. Whatever your design is obvious. Well, if you're doing it well, then you should be doing a lot of things that aren't obvious, and that people wouldn't come up with just on their own devices. You could trace it back to Rousseau at the very least.
So much to answer for.
Yeah. This idea that just people can learn from being, exposed to the world, and they can, but I think one of the kind of the problems, the fundamental mistakes that people see is that they don't see how actually learning or knowledge shapes experience. And it's really much more that knowledge shapes experience than experience shapes knowledge. So, I could, for example, someone who's a music aficionado could just say, I don't know, play me Beethoven's Fifth, for example, and say, well, just experience, just listen to it. But I can't hear it, because I don't have the conceptual tools, I don't have the aesthetic tools to really perceive what's wonderful about this. I mean, some of it I might, but I don't. Without certain, concepts and perceptual tools, I just won't get it. And so this idea of, just giving people experiences is, I think we have to challenge. It's not entirely wrong, but it's, I think, this view that learning is somehow natural to us. Most of the things that we know are not natural. Acquiring a language is natural. Learning to walk is natural. Things that babies do, that you didn't teach them. Those are natural things. Everything else is more or less an unnatural or artificial process.
Mm-hmm.
Things like learning written language and math. These are things that you have to be taught to learn.
How about something that falls kind of halfway between what's natural to learn, learning a language, Chomsky, and the more unnatural things, like riding a bike? So I was reading something about Kolb and experiential learning the other day, and learning to ride a bike was given as an example, and he talks there about how experience plays a part in that, because we try something out, it doesn't work, then we reflect on the principles, and then we try it again. Well, I don't remember when I was riding a bike ever reflecting on the principles of riding a bike. I reflect nowadays a lot on the principles of how Bradley Wiggins won the Tour de France, but at the time I just fell off until I didn't.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember when I was living in New York, and one of my neighbors had a son that was probably about 5, and he was learning to ride a bike, and he kept trying it, and he'd go, for a few feet and then fall off, and he got so angry, he said, "I'm gonna be a little kid for the rest of my life!" I thought it was great.
Immersive learning experiences are transforming the way we work, play and learn, and there's one company I've followed for years who've been pioneering in the use of virtual and augmented reality to enhance learning and boost outcomes. Make Real lead the field in validating the use cases of immersive technologies for everything from soft skills to health, safety and well-being. If you attended Learning Technologies 2020 at London Excel, you might have spoken with their team or heard a case study from one of their clients, Lloyds Banking Group. Don't worry if you didn't, they'll be back next year, bigger and badder than ever. Make Real moves beyond just hard skills like maintenance and carrying out virtual dangerous activities with a flourishing catalogue of interpersonal soft skills training around diversity, well-being, mental health, coaching and much more. Talk to Make Real about using immersive to drive real-world outcomes with bottom-line benefits. Check out their shiny new website, makereal.co.uk, for more use case studies. Make a note of it now. In real life.
Kolb is right. People can learn from experience. They can learn from reflection. However, I think that there's a few kind of qualifications that need to be given to that. And first is where I said that certain things are just simply not experienced if you don't have the conceptual equipment in place, if you don't know what to be looking for. As I was talking to you yesterday about the penny example, there's an online quiz where it shows you 10 examples of, I think, an American penny, and says, which is the correct penny. And everybody gets it wrong. Even though we've looked at a penny, or Americans have anyway, hundreds and possibly thousands of times, because their eyes weren't trained to look at certain things, that those experiences were for nothing. But the other thing, I think, is bearing in mind the kind of speed and quality of the feedback that you're getting from the experience. So on a bicycle, you can get very immediate feedback if you're paying attention. However, for something like education, the quality of feedback that you're getting and the feedback loops can sometimes be very ambiguous and happen over quite great spans of time. And so,
not so years, but decades even.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we have to do in those and other situations is create artificial environments, create artificial experiences. We need to, and we need to, give people the tools to look at other people's, to learn from other people's experiences instead of our own. And that's what civilization is. That's what culture is, and that's why humans are great, is actually mostly that we can learn from other people's experiences. I don't have to reinvent electricity to use it.
Yeah. I'd like to slightly stick up for experienced designers. I was talking to a young learning designer yesterday who is itching to make the break from being a learning designer to being a learning experience designer. And I said, why that? Why is that? And she said, well, being a learning designer is basically about structuring content. Being a learning experience designer, as she understands it, is about, this is my chance to do what being a learning designer always ought to be, which is about producing an experience that isn't just about the content, which uses all sorts of kind of digital nudges and prompts to take people on a journey, and breaks you out of that thing of just focusing on producing a piece of content. So I can sort of see why people get very excited about it, particularly at that kind of craft and practice level.
Well, absolutely. And I should say for myself, I have read writing on UX and on visual design extensively, and it completely changed my practice. I think that, however, I guess what I would argue is that is instructional design. When you're doing it for learning, it's that the way that actually Paul Kirshner in an interview in I think it was quite obscure journal, like a journal of mathematics for learning, talks about the instructional designer as like a chef. And the chef has got, you're a 3-star Michelin chef, and you've got basically 3 things that you're dealing with. You have tools techniques, and ingredients. And the 3-star Michelin chef has the best tools. He's got the best knives, best ovens and saute pans. He's got the best techniques. He's got cutting skills, frying skills, baking skills, and he's got the best ingredients. And in educational terms, this would be the tools would be the technology that you're using. The techniques would be basically the pedagogy and the design, and the ingredients is really the curriculum or the content. But the point is that, and this is what Dave Merrill would say, I think this is really what Gagne would say, is that it's really about the whole thing. It's really about, I feel funny using this analogy, but it's really like the kind of the Wagner-esque, dream, the Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art.
Yeah. There we go.
It's about designing. It's about total designing everything. Or I think it was the Pet Shop Boys that said, everything counts in large amounts.
I don't think it was the Pet Shop Boys.
It was Erasure? No.
Tears for Fears.
Wait, maybe I should look it up.
No, everything.
Okay, sorry.
Depeche Mode.
Depeche Mode, thank you.
Basildon's finest, I think.
Well done. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right.
Maybe listeners can email us in or send messages on Twitter.
Depeche Mode. But yes,
right.
And it's that, and I think in a way UX is of the same spirit. There was actually Donald Norman, who apparently coined the term UX or user experience,
right.
Said in a video, basically, it's not really about experience. That's not the point. What I was really trying to say is that, but yeah, I think it's the same dream in a funny way. Donald Norman, who I think coined the term user experience, said, hey, when I talked about experience, it's not what I'm not trying to say is it's just about experience. What I'm trying to say is it's about the whole thing. It's about the whole, designing the whole package, not just looking at designing a teacup or, designing a table. It's trying to think more broadly. And I think that instructional design shares that dream for education or for learning, but I guess in a way UX is a bigger umbrella because it's sort of it's the design. In a way it's the design of everything.
I'd like to talk a little bit about that thing between learning experience design and UX design, because I have a suspicion that UX has been a big influence on people talking about experience designing. In other words, a lot of the people who are doing it at craft level have a lot of have grown up with a reverence and respect for Nielsen's principles of usability. Now, here's a theory that you can knock down. I think the difference between UX and learning experience design is that one of Nielsen's principles is that the ultimate success is the satisfaction of the user. And I think you're explicitly saying that, you can give 10 out of 10 on the happy sheet, you can have a good experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean you've learned anything.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest dilemmas or problems is that most of, wanting to be fair to UX, especially usability engineering, is about removing difficulty, or was it Stephen Krug wrote the book, Don't Make Me Think.
Yeah.
What we're really trying to do is not make things easier, not remove thought for people, but actually to make things more difficult. And of course, I think the question is that it doesn't make usability go away, but it's about learning is about making the right things.
Yeah, there's a kind of it feels like a paradox here, because I was talking to Stephen Walsh of Anders Pink about digital curation, and he was talking about the effort that goes into producing a seamless user experience so people can get their stuff really quickly, and how bad the user experience is within organisations having to log onto multiple systems and so on. So there's kind of a level of difficulty that people are working very hard to remove. At the same time, you're saying learning means putting in difficulty at the right place. Yeah. So it's kind of is it taking difficulty out in one place?
So absolutely, and so you could argue that actually usability and UX is the most important in learning, because we are going to ask people to do difficult things, and so we need to make everything else perfect. And you can also use UX to build focus, to direct people's attention and to motivate people. And you can use also things like what people call persuasive design, which I think falls under the heading of UX, to try to, to motivate people and to keep them going. But in the end, UX is a vehicle, and it doesn't have, the map to where we're going. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to be to create something that's very usable, very engaging, but doesn't get the right results. And I think that really good UX and good ID are the least opposed to each other. I think probably the real threat to instructional design or to learning is when you have mediocre UX and mediocre instructional design, and there's more of a threat of actually the mediocre UX messing up the instructional design and vice versa. So for example, there was a eLearning platform company that I won't name that hired some UX people to get students' opinions on what they wanted from a platform, and they talked to them, they did surveys, and one of their main takeaways is that students wanted an easier way to find their reading resources. Well, that's all. That's kind of interesting, but mostly what that reflects is that students have really bad study habits, because actually if they're just focused on reading and rereading, that's not actually a very effective way to learn. And we're just reinforcing that if we build a platform that does that. Now, what Jacob Nielsen would say is that this is actually just bad UX too, because you shouldn't ask your users how to design things.
Users can't design the system.
Yeah, users can't design the system. And so, I could say, oh, well, that's UX, just messing up ID. But really, it's bad UX, messing up ID.
Okay. There's a whole kind of trend of thinking which is around sort of co-creation and self-directed learning and so on, which it seems that you're kind of running in a different direction to that. Do you ever get called old-fashioned or old school?
Well, not directly, but I was at an HE event where there were some tweets that happened that really that from people I know and usually who just said, oh yeah, ID is whatever, that's the old stuff, learning design is the new stuff. Or it was almost like it felt like a hot or not, what's in season thing from Cosmo or something. I think that what I see in higher ed is just a really shocking level of brazen ignorance about instructional design. People are not embarrassed to be so so sort of boldly ignorant of what of what instructional design is. I think that's changing, but I do wonder. I mean, in higher ed, what's one of the big things that's really happening is that OPMs, or what are called online program managers, are really taking a big piece of, really getting a big piece of the e-learning action from universities. And these are big companies like Laureate, Wiley, Pearson, Cambridge Education Group.
Huge companies. Pearson's one of the largest companies, most profitable companies in the world.
Absolutely.
Still.
There's a company called 2U in the US. A lot of them are American companies, getting huge contracts, and the whole existing culture of online learning, of learning technologists, is just getting left in the dust. Mm-hmm. And I think that people are maybe listening a bit more, maybe like a little bit more humble, and listening, because I think that some of these places, other places, are actually a bit more hip to some of this stuff, and that the regular old conversations may not work anymore. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong.
So leaving aside really the resistance that there is in higher ed, if you kind of look with a broad brush, for all the big changes in learning with the move to digital technology and something of an explosion of new ideas in the last 30 years about how learning should be done, are we actually potentially getting any better at helping adults to learn, do you think? Or are we forgetting more than we're actually inventing? ABD, NBD.
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both. I mean, I think that, there's really exciting research happening right now. There's a lot of really great things going on in the educational research world. There's been this whole great revival of research in retrieval practice, for example, and some of the work that Paul Kirshner and Marianne Boer, and a lot of things coming out of the Netherlands is great. And I think that actually, even though there is with UX a risk of forgetting about pedagogy altogether, and let's just create great stuff, and part of that is professionalization, just trying to create professional level content. Even with all these kind of temptations and facile conversations, I think that almost every education sector is getting better, actually. Mm-hmm. Schools are getting better, higher education is getting better, whether it likes it or not, and L&D is getting better. And I see that at conferences even. Yeah. You go and people are upping their game, I see better content from people, and there's great, there's a lot of stuff I don't like, and I mostly go to conferences and get a bit sort of annoyed and prickly, but there's loads of people doing great stuff, Will Thalheimer, Donald Taylor, Donald Clark, Miriam Nealon, there's a lot of Julie Dirksen, there's so many people that are doing really, really good work that you can't fault, so in a way it's an exciting time. I think that maybe the trick for the us people on the ground is trying to show how all of this is adding up to greater value.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Huge thanks to Leonard for a really interesting conversation that, after the tape was turned off, carried on over lunch and well into the afternoon. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. Please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice to get future episodes automatically. And if you're keen to help other people find us, please give a review and a 5-star rating. If you want to sponsor or give me any feedback about anything at all, you can reach me at John Helmer on Twitter or through my website, johnhelmerconsulting.com. Next time on The Learning Hack, we have Paul McIlvaney from Learning Pool, a company that has experienced extraordinary growth in the last few years and on the innovation front is really making waves.
Now I finally get it.
Bye for now. What age did you give up skateboarding?
I gave up skateboarding pretty much when my son was born, which was about, I guess that would be when I turned 38. So I had a good run at it. I really did it a lot and for a long time. It was great, probably one of the greatest passions of my life. I went back to Portland, Oregon, where I grew up this summer, and I'd not been there for a long time, and I saw a lot of old friends, and it was funny because basically all the people or a lot of the people that I grew up skateboarding with, those friendships are still completely in place. They are basically friendships that'll last the rest of their lives, and but it was a funny thing, because it was so good to see everyone, but there was just such a sense of like, wow, it really is all over.